was 2019. Samantha Josephson was 21 years old. She was about to graduate from college and had just gotten accepted into law school. Life was good, but what no one knew was that Samantha's life was about to end, and clues to what happened to her in those last moments were caught on video. I want to introduce you to Samantha Josephson. She was born on August 13, 1997, and raised in Robbinsville, New Jersey. She was the second daughter born to Marcy and Seymour Josephson. Her parents met when they were in college. Seymour was working at a supermarket that Marcy went to all the time, and Marcy would purposely use his lane when she was checking out. 2 years after Marcy first saw Seymour in that store, she was introduced to him by a friend when they walked past the store one night. Seymour was like, "Hey, I used to work there," and that's when Marcy remembered that he was the cute guy behind the counter. Sydney is Samantha's older sister. She was born 20 months before her, and they were very close. When Samantha was first born, Sydney would only refer to her as baby. Samantha Josephson was everybody's best friend. She got along with everyone. To her friends, she was known as Sammy, and to her family as Sweet Pea. Samantha was goofy, she was silly, and she was the life of the party. Although Samantha had a playful side, there was another part of her that was fiercely loyal and serious. One of Samantha's friends, Jessica, would always say that no one knew what Samantha was up to when she was exploring and playing, but she was an enormous amount of fun, and she was feisty and funny. So much so that Samantha's friends would call her silly antics, Sammyisms. As a teenager, Samantha loved Justin Bieber. At one concert, she covered her face in face paint in order to catch the pop star's attention. One of Samantha's college professors described her as always trying to improve daily. She was always trying to better herself. In 2015, Samantha graduated from Robbinsville High School and studied overseas in Barcelona in 2018. She took this trip with her sister, and there are so many really awesome Facebook posts that they made together. Their parents were so proud of the fact that they were traveling together, learning together, and that they had such a close relationship. When Samantha was a child, she was interested in beauty and cosmetics, and she even considered studying cosmetology. She practiced doing her hair and her makeup, and she even did this with her mom and her sister before deciding on a completely different career path. Samantha had big dreams and big aspirations. She was determined to change the world. Whatever Samantha's future career path might have been, she wanted to make a difference, and that's when she decided she wanted to become an attorney. Since Sydney and Samantha were so close in age and only pretty much 1 year apart in school, Marcy told Samantha to take everything in that she could from the schools that her sister was visiting. From New Jersey, the family flew to South Carolina to tour the University of South Carolina. While Sydney ultimately chose to go to another university, the school made a very strong impression on Samantha. Samantha knew this was the college that she was going to attend after she was done with senior high school, and no one was surprised when she received her acceptance letter to the University of South Carolina the following year. Marcy and Seymour were initially reluctant because they didn't want to send their daughter so far away. She was born and raised in New Jersey. She was a Jersey girl. But they discussed it in depth, and having lived in the Northeast her whole life, Seymour knew that the South was different from the Northeast. He felt like Samantha had to take a new journey, especially as a Jewish woman. He thought it would be good for her to be in a world that was completely different than the one that she already knew. Marcy and Seymour also worried about their daughter's safety. What parent doesn't these days, especially when they're sending their children off to college in another state? But they agreed that the University of South Carolina was likely safer than a large city school, and they were happy that Samantha wanted to be there. The University of South Carolina is a public research university located in Columbia, South Carolina. It was established over 200 years ago. There are over 300 bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degree programs offered at USC. It's actually the largest university in the state, with business, engineering, law, and medical schools on its Columbia campus. Among the university's renowned traditions are sports and Greek life. Gamecocks are the university's mascot and the name of its sports teams, which are roosters bred to fight. The university's varsity teams all compete at the Division I level in the NCAA. Approximately 30% of the University of South Carolina's student body is involved in fraternities and sorority life. Marcy and Seymour dropped Samantha off at the University of South Carolina on her 18th birthday, and she acclimated immediately. She was having the time of her life. It was nerve-wracking for Samantha's parents because their child was so far away. New Jersey was a 12-hour drive or a pretty expensive plane ride away, and Marcy and Seymour would not be able to reach Samantha immediately if she needed something, or if something were to happen to her. They could only hope that they had prepared Samantha for the real world, and Marcy and Seymour did. Samantha was a bright, responsible girl. During her first year of college, Samantha's entire family traveled to South Carolina to come see her. It was on Parents' Weekend. They watched a football game, had a great time together, and Sydney said it was really great to see her sister so comfortable at this university. Samantha was proud to show her parents and her sister her dorm room and her school. She fit in perfectly. While Samantha was enrolled at the University of South Carolina, she joined Alpha Gamma Delta, which is a sorority on campus. It was founded on May 30th, 1904, at the University of Syracuse in New York. Their mascot is a squirrel, and their colors are red, light brown, and green. The sorority's charity focuses on fighting hunger, and there are over 201,000 members in the over 199 college chapters and more than 250 alumni chapters across North America. So being in the sorority was kind of a big deal for Samantha. By her senior year, she was living in a place called the Hub with some of her closest friends, Carly, Jordan, and Jenny, and her best friend Tegan Barry. There's a spa, a gym, a nice big pool. I mean, look at this. It looks like they even have a projector to play movies while you swim. That's awesome. There's a real sand volleyball court, plus lots of places to tan and hang out. It was perfect for Samantha and her roommates. On the site, it also says it's luxury living in a college town. They boast a pool and sun deck, work and study areas, technology and security, and lots of activities for students. They even have VIP apartments, which offer a lot more amenities, like a private hot tub, walk-in closets. Pretty awesome. It looks like they've just thought of everything. I mentioned Samantha's roommate and close friend Tegan. Well, they really hit it off, both being from New Jersey. Tegan is from Clinton, New Jersey, and she did 1 year of community college before transferring to USC. She was set to graduate the very same year as Sammy, in 2019. Tegan's friend and roommate, Jacqueline, was also transferring to USC, and her older brother went there, so she knew him, of course, as well as some of his friends. Jacqueline was the one who ended up introducing Tegan to Sammy, Carly, Jordan, and Jenny. Tegan became very good friends with Sammy, and they lived together at the Hub their senior year. Tegan thought of Sammy as caring, compassionate, easygoing, and goofy. They'd hang out all the time, they'd go to football games, eat together, go out to bars, everything. They went to a popular college party area in town called 5 Points, and they went there very often. They were very familiar with this area. This is a small area consisting of bars and restaurants in Columbia, South Carolina. It's only a 3-minute drive from the university, which makes it an ideal place for students to grab a bite to eat, have a few drinks, or hang out with their friends when they're not in class. The main street in the middle of 5 Points is called Hardin, and it's right here on the map. There are all kinds of fun places to go for food like Home Team Barbecue, this sushi place, Blue Pizza, Breaker's Bar and Grill, and then there are bars like the 5 Point Saloon, Rooftop Bar, and the Bird Dog, as well as a whole bunch of cute shops, clothing stores, smoke shops, and fast food. It's got it all, it's perfect for college students, and it's only a 7-minute drive from the Hub, which is ideal for the girls. Aside from making many close friends, Samantha also had a boyfriend at the University of South Carolina. His name was Greg Corbishley. As a matter of fact, the two of them met at 5 Points. He's from Charleston, South Carolina, where he graduated from high school and eventually ended up attending South Carolina University. He was a year ahead of Samantha, and he and Samantha met one night when they were out having fun at the bars in 5 Points. They really just hit it off. They started talking, and the friendship ended up evolving into something more, into more of a seeing each other type thing. They were really just enjoying each other's company for about a year until they officially became girlfriend and boyfriend in the spring of 2017. They did everything together. They were in constant contact, even more than the average couple. They only lived 5 minutes apart, and they would be FaceTiming each other all the time, checking in, and they'd hang out almost every day, going to restaurants, bars, football games. They were in love and just wanted to spend all of their time together. Greg was studying marketing with a minor in sports management, and he did end up graduating from USC in 2018. Samantha was a political science major with aspirations of going to law school. She was expected to graduate in the spring of 2019. By 2019, Samantha and Greg had been dating for 2 years, and they were happy together. They were even planning on moving close to one another. They just wanted to wait to see what would happen after Sammy graduated. The next step was law school. So Greg was currently living back in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, but he would come see Samantha on a regular basis, even though it was like a 2-hour drive. I think it was 120 miles away. Although Samantha did not want her senior year at the University of South Carolina to end, she knew it was time to begin preparing for law school. She applied to Rutgers University in New Jersey and Drexel University in Philadelphia. Samantha ended up being awarded a partial scholarship from Rutgers University and a full scholarship from Drexel. Despite liking what both schools had to offer, Samantha found it really hard to turn down a full scholarship to one of the country's top 40 premier research institutions, and as a result, Samantha chose to enroll at Drexel University in the fall of 2019. Like I mentioned, Drexel is located in Philadelphia, so once Greg knew that Sammy chose Drexel, their plan after graduation, due to the difficulty of law school, was that Greg was going to move to Philadelphia and look for work. They would not live together, but they would be close enough so that they could still spend a lot of time together and see each other whenever they could. Law Student Acceptance Day was held in Philadelphia, and Samantha was flown there by the university. Her whole family met her there, and afterward, Seymour, Marcy, Sydney, and Samantha enjoyed their day at a winery. They spent a lot of time together celebrating and getting excited about Samantha's future. And this picture of them, they look so happy, and they were happy on March 25, 2019. Samantha Josephson returned to the University of South Carolina. Demand only had 1 month to go before she graduated from college. It was a joyous time. She and her friends were ready to celebrate. They decided that they were going to take a break from their studies on Thursday, March 28th, and go hang out at 5 Points. Thursdays were like Fridays for them, because they only took classes from Monday to Thursday. No matter where they started the night, every student seemed to somehow end up at 5 Points. After a night of partying, the typical way to get home was good old Uber. The plan was that the girls would pregame at the hub, go to their friend's house to park their car, it's close to 5 Points, only a few minutes walk, and then hang out at the bars and take an Uber back to the hub. A typical night. That day, Greg was in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. He started his day by going over to his brother's house to look after his dog because his brother had to work. The March Madness games were happening that night, so he was watching them around 7:30 p.m. But Greg was in constant contact with Samantha the entire day, as usual. They FaceTimed, called each other, and texted, but Samantha really wanted him to come visit her that night. She and her roommates had already started pre-gaming before they headed out, and she was still begging Greg to make that drive and come hang out with her that day. She had actually confided in Greg about a family member who had found out some medical issues, and she was not in a very good headspace mentally. She was upset. So Greg told her, you know what, get your mind off everything, just go out, enjoy some time with your friends. She had just worked really hard to get into law school. He told her she deserved to have a carefree night, have fun, and celebrate. The NCAA game had just ended, so Greg headed out to the gym around 9:30 p.m., and he talked to Samantha a couple of times while he was at the gym. She was still trying to convince him to come out that night. If he had maybe agreed, things might have been different, but like I said, it was a 2-hour drive, and though he usually did say yes, this particular night he didn't want to. She was supposed to come see him 2 days later. They had plans for her to go up there to Charleston. They had a whole entire trip planned out, so it really didn't make sense for him to go all the way there just for her to come all the way back a couple of days later. It was also getting late. Greg got home from the gym around 11:30 p.m., and at this point, Samantha was still asking him to come out that night. She and her friends were heading to their friend Edgar's house, which was only 2 minutes away from 5 Points. Everything was going as planned. They left Edgar's and walked straight to the Bird Dog Lounge. They got there around 12:15 a.m., and that was their go-to place. They had really cheap drinks. It was just a typical normal bar. They were listening to music, talking, laughing, and hanging out. Everyone was just enjoying each other's company. They had gone to the Bird Dog numerous times before this, and Samantha and Greg were in contact throughout the night. Just small talk via text about who was there, what she was doing, just casual conversation. After hanging out with her friends until about 2 a.m., Samantha decided she wanted to call it a night. Although the bar was closed around 3 a.m., Samantha had to work. She worked at Liberty Tap Room and had to be there the next day around 11 o'clock. She was punctual and diligent about her work, so for this reason Samantha found herself waiting for an Uber outside of 5 Points around 2 a.m. Her dad had given her his credit card number because he wanted to make sure that any time she needed a ride home, she could easily call an Uber. She didn't have to worry if there was no money in her account. He didn't want her to take any chances driving with someone who had been drinking or hitchhiking home or trying to walk home in the middle of the night. And that made sense because Greg and Samantha were dating long distance. They decided to install an app called Find My Friends on their phones to make sure they both got home safely when they weren't together. All of their friends also had this app installed, and it was super common for them to track each other to make sure they were safe. After Samantha told Greg she was leaving the Bird Dog Lounge to catch an Uber, he wanted to ensure that she got home safely, so he began to track her on the Find My Friends app. As Greg watched, he noticed that Samantha was traveling in the opposite direction of her apartment complex. She was going south of the Bird Dog, as you can see on this map. This is where the Bird Dog is, and this is where Samantha was supposed to be headed back home at first. When he saw this, he really didn't think much of it. He figured, okay, maybe she's going back to Edgar's. He didn't even know, maybe she was with a friend, but he kept tracking her phone, and it was still going in the wrong direction. At this point, Greg was thinking, is Samantha mad at me? Maybe she's going somewhere and didn't want Greg to know. So he texted her but didn't get an answer. He called again, no answer. When he tried to call again, it went straight to voicemail. That's when he noticed that his text messages were marked delivered, but not read. They both always had red receipts on. Samantha read his messages. There wasn't a time she didn't. Either she was purposely not opening his texts, or she couldn't for some reason. At this point, Greg was worried. He thought there might be something more serious going on. This would be absolutely terrifying to me. Not being able to get a hold of someone that I'm close to, that I care about, that I love, I would be worried sick. Greg then attempted to contact her on Snapchat, but she didn't answer there either. But what's even more terrifying is when he went back to the app, he could no longer track her location. It stopped. That had never happened. Not even once in their entire relationship. So what's going on? This is around 2:30 to 2:40 a.m. The last place her phone tracked was at Montgomery Avenue, and this is in Rosewood, which is pretty far from where she was supposed to be headed. At this point, Greg wasn't sure what to think. He thought, okay, maybe she left her phone in an Uber and it was just tracking where the driver was going. Greg kept calling and calling to see if she would eventually pick up, but she didn't. It was time to dig deeper. He wanted to know what was going on. So Greg contacted Samantha's roommate and best friend, Tegan. He sent her screenshots showing where Samantha's phone had last been tracked, in Rosewood, a suburb of Columbia. After talking to Greg, Tegan pulled up the Find My Friends app, and she saw that her app tracked Samantha to the same location that Greg mentioned. So she and her other friends decided they were going to go to that location and look around. They looked on the grass, they looked on the road, but they didn't see any sign of her phone or any sign of Samantha. They still weren't able to get in contact with her. So eventually, they decided to go back home to the hub. When they got there, Samantha was not there. When they arrived, the room to her door was actually still open and her bedroom was empty. Her bedroom was before Tegan's down the hall. Tegan had to pass it on the way to hers, and she noticed that Samantha's work shoes were still outside of her room. She knew that Samantha had to work the next day, so she kind of took note of that, and then proceeded to go to her room and go to bed, still assuming that Samantha just maybe left her phone in an Uber. Even though Samantha was not home at this late hour of the night into the early morning, not answering any of their calls or texts, and her phone was no longer tracking after going in the totally opposite direction from home, He couldn't sleep throughout the night. Greg called and texted Samantha, and after convincing himself that he was freaking out for no reason, he decided to try to get some sleep. A restless sleep at that. But he told himself Samantha would call him the next day, and it was probably a big misunderstanding. They would have a hilarious laugh about it, and there was probably a story behind everything. It was going to be just fine. That's what Greg hoped. He finally got to bed somewhere between 5 and 5:30 that morning. That same morning, though, hours later, Friday, March 29th, Tegan woke up. It was around 10:30, and when she came out of her room, she saw Samantha's shoes, and Samantha's door was still open. Samantha was not there, and that's when she really became concerned. She started a group chat with all the roommates via text, and they came out to the living room to start coming up with a plan. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, Greg woke up to his phone ringing. He had missed 3 calls already from Samantha's roommates, and the phone was ringing again. It was Carly. She informed him that Samantha was still not at the apartment, and they were getting very concerned. After talking to Samantha's roommates, Greg immediately got into his car and started driving towards Columbia. Samantha's roommates called the local hospitals, and Greg just made his way down there to help them. Her roommates even went back to Montgomery Avenue, but they still didn't see any signs of Samantha. At this point, they called the jail and the police station. They wanted to check if maybe she had literally gotten arrested the night before, and that's why she couldn't have access to her phone. At that point, they also believed they had to wait 24 hours before reporting somebody missing. That is not true, but that's what they thought. So they were just kind of conducting their own research until they finally called the police. They went back to the apartment, and that's when they decided to try her laptop to see if they could get into it. And they did. They were able to get into her email account, and they went to the most recent messages. They located a message from Uber, and it was a receipt from the night before. It showed that Samantha had requested an Uber to pick her up from 5 Points around 2 a.m. Look at this. The ride was canceled, not by Samantha, but by the driver. They saw the $5 cancellation charge. The driver stated that Samantha never showed up. The car she was supposed to get picked up in was a charcoal-colored Dodge Charger. After discovering what they found on Samantha's laptop, they called Greg in a panic. With no other option, Greg decided to finally call Seymour and Marcy in New Jersey to let them know their daughter was missing. Greg called Marcy first. She was out having lunch with a friend, and he told her nobody had been able to contact Samantha since the night before, when she was at the Bird Dog Lounge at 2 o'clock in the morning. Marcy hung up the phone in a panic and called her husband. This was her and her husband's worst nightmare. She asked Seymour if he had heard from Greg, and he said no. Why? She asked. She explained that Greg had just called and said Samantha was missing. What do you mean? He asked. She told him that Samantha hadn't come back the previous evening, and Seymour told Marcy to get home right away because they were driving to South Carolina. I don't know why they didn't just fly because it is a 10-hour drive. But Samantha's sister, Sydney, received that phone call from her father as well. It was around 1:20 p.m. in the afternoon, and he told her to get home immediately. When Sydney asked why, her dad said that her sister was missing, but Sydney couldn't understand why her parents were freaking out so badly. Samantha's phone probably just died, Sydney thought, and she believed her sister was fine, but Seymour insisted that Sydney get home now. When she finally did reach home in Robbinsville, New Jersey, Seymour and Marcy had already started their 10-hour drive to Columbia, South Carolina. So, while Seymour and Marcy were traveling there, Greg was arriving as well. By this time, he and Samantha's friends had reported her missing to the police, and they all started to search for her themselves. Officer Amanda Muscatus came out to the Hub Apartments, and she was the one who took the missing persons report that day. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She took all of their information and then started calling places. She did reach out to Liberty Tap Room, and they were able to confirm that Samantha had not shown up for work that day. While she was sitting there writing up the report, she was approached by Greg. He had just arrived, and he also provided her with information. That was when the officer was able to confirm that none of the roommates, nor Greg, had heard from Samantha since the night before. She got in touch with Samantha's parents, and they let her know that they did not know where she was, and had not heard from her either. They were on their way there. She also obtained a photo of Samantha from Tegan, They wanted this for an Amber Alert, and it was sent out to the public and to the Columbia Police Department. After the officer left, Greg and Samantha's roommates decided to go back to the Rosewood area again, where Samantha's phone had last pinged. They knocked on doors and went around the whole town, wanting to see if anyone had heard or seen anything suspicious the night before. But no one had. They did the same thing they had done before. They looked at the roads and the grass. They were really looking everywhere for Samantha's phone, but there were no clues left behind at that location. Everyone was also making social media posts. They were begging their friends to share information about Samantha in case anyone had heard from her or seen anything the night before. The word was traveling fast. The campus was buzzing. Students were scared. Everyone was wondering what could have happened in their close-knit college community, but they were holding on to hope. They were praying that Samantha would turn up. Some of her friends, like the family friend I told you about, her name is Jessica, actually found out that Samantha was missing from Instagram. It's terrifying, but this became reality for friends like Jessica. She immediately jumped out of a business meeting to call her mother and ask her, "Is this true? Is Samantha really missing?" And her mom did give her the devastating news. Samantha's mom and dad were already on their way to South Carolina, and that Jessica should probably come home from work. It's almost like they just had this feeling that this was not going to turn out well. The drive for her parents seemed to drag on for an eternity, even though Seymour was going over 80 miles an hour, and they were in constant contact with the police department. They were looking for updates, minute by minute, as many as they possibly could get. This trip just could not go by fast enough. They wanted to get there. They wanted to find their daughter. Back in South Carolina, Samantha's friends go down to the 5 Points area. Now they're going to different establishments and asking the managers if they could look at the surveillance videos that they had. They wanted to see if they could spot Samantha. They wanted to see if she got into a car, and if she did, what did it look like? Did she walk somewhere? They wanted anything they could get that would guide them in a direction to find her. They went to a place called the Breakers because it had a pretty big view of Main Street, but they didn't have anything for them. After that, they visited the Bird Dog Lounge. This is where Samantha's friends saw her last. When they reached the bar, Greg talked to the owner and asked if they could view the CCTV footage from the previous evening. They explained how their friend had gone missing, and they wanted to track her movements and see if she got into someone's car. The bar owner recognized Samantha's friends and knew they were in distress, so he let them see the surveillance footage. The owner brought them into a room filled with screens, and Greg pointed out the camera that pointed towards the street where the Uber drivers typically pick people up. "It's right here in this area, under this tree. This is where everyone in that area knows to stand so that their Uber can quickly stop and you can jump in and head out." As Greg and Samantha's roommates are reviewing the videos, they see Samantha. They see her enter the bar at 12:43 a.m. Since they knew her so well, and she was wearing a bright-colored shirt that night, it was easy for them to spot her in the footage. She was wearing a reddish-orange top, black jeans, platform sandals, and a white bralette. Samantha could be seen drinking, dancing, and having a great time at the Bird Dog. She appeared to be acting completely normal. Greg asked the owner if he could fast-forward the footage to about 1:50 a.m. That's when Samantha was on the phone, walking out of the Bird Dog, and she called for an Uber. They watched closely. They saw Samantha outside the Bird Dog, and they wanted to see if she was being followed, but everything seemed perfectly fine. I'm going to be showing you all of this footage. Here's Samantha. She comes out of the bar. She's standing in the designated Uber area or Lyft area, the rideshare portion of the sidewalk that everyone goes to. This is where cars know to come pick up the patrons, and nothing seems out of the ordinary. There's no creepy person following her. There's no one even near her. She's just standing there alone, waiting for her ride. At one point, a gray sedan pulls up, and as you see, it's kind of slowing down in front of that rideshare area. Samantha walks forward. She reaches for the door, but then the car drives away. The Uber either didn't see her, or it wasn't actually her Uber. To be fair, she had been drinking, so it's not uncommon for you to get a little confused. There's a lot happening, lots of cars going by, lots of people outside. But then at 2:12, a black four-door sedan pulls right into this little handicap spot, right under the tree. Once again, she steps off the curb, walks towards the vehicle, reaches out to open the back passenger's door, and his time she was able to open the door. She gets into the vehicle. However, her friends know the Uber canceled. So, was this the Uber? Did she get inside and then the driver cancel the trip and kidnap her? It was so hard to watch this footage, especially since I know what's going to happen after. The traffic cleared, and the video captured the car pulling out of that parking spot and then driving off. Greg and Samantha's roommates felt sick to their stomachs. They knew that Samantha's Uber ride had canceled, and they knew it was supposed to be a charcoal gray Dodge. If Samantha's Uber was truly canceled, then whose car did she get into? Had she called someone else? There's just a series of crazy scenarios that begin to play out in Greg's head, and they'd be playing out in mine as well. Whoever drove away with Samantha, Greg hoped they had not hurt her. He immediately contacted the Columbia Police Department and informed them about what he saw on that disturbing CCTV footage. Investigator Chris Odom from the Columbia, South Carolina Police Department led the investigation into the dark vehicle that Samantha entered. She contacted a company called Statewide Security, and they have cameras throughout the Five Points area. They requested the footage for the specific time that Samantha was outside the bar. Statewide Security had video of the parking lot next to the Bird Dog Lounge. And I have this footage from this angle. It shows Samantha standing outside the bar, but there was something unsettling about this recording. As the investigator watched, she noticed that in the 15 minutes prior to Samantha entering that black Chevy Impala, it had circled the Bird Dog Lounge a number of times. The driver of this vehicle would stop for long periods of time, which was strange, then drive around making U-turn after U-turn to come back to that area where these Ubers typically pick people up. It was as though they were scouting for people, they were stalking, waiting. At one point in the video, investigator Odom noticed that the driver of the Chevy Impala was positioned in that parking lot that I showed you in a way that would give them a clear view of Samantha. She was directly in their line of sight. She was clearly looking for her Uber, and the person driving that Impala was able to see her try to get into the gray car, before he decides to pull around and pull into that spot. This investigator noticed that the driver was so eager to get to Samantha, he actually jumped the curb to get into that parking spot. It was like a shark circling its prey. As investigator Odom examined the video closely, she recognized Samantha entering the car at 2:09. Then she pulled up other video surveillance from this same security company and was able to track the vehicle. She also tried to zoom in so she could see details, but she could never actually make out who was driving. She couldn't see their face or any details about who they were. She did notice, however, that they were sitting pretty far back, like reclined in their seat. That was apparent, and you can see it right here. If you look clearly, the chair, the actual seat of the car, is leaned back. I will outline the line right here of where it is. As far as you could tell, no one else was in the car, except for this driver and Samantha. However, whoever was driving that car was the main suspect in Samantha Josephson's disappearance. At this point, the investigator doesn't think it would have taken Samantha that long to realize her driver was not headed in the right direction. She also believed that the driver had to engage the child locks, and that was what was preventing Samantha from opening the door or rolling down the windows. Having realized she was trapped, Samantha must have felt so helpless. That is absolutely terrifying. Investigator Odom tracked the vehicle throughout 5 Points, and although the investigator searched as long as she could, the last place she could locate the car on the CCTV footage was about 1.5 miles away. After the vehicle left that area, there were no longer cameras on the streets to record it. Based on the footage, investigator Odom concluded that Samantha was picked up in a late-model Chevy Impala, black in color, and immediately issued an updated bolo. However, the investigator could not determine the license plate number of that vehicle. The Columbia Police Department enlisted the assistance of SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. SLED Lieutenant Kristen Grant received a call from her captain telling her that she was needed in Columbia to assist the Columbia, South Carolina Department. Lieutenant Grant interviewed Samantha's roommates once again and her boyfriend, and she asked them to explain everything that happened from when they last heard from Samantha. Tegan told her that the last time she remembered seeing Samantha was in the corner of the Bird Dog Lounge, and she was on her phone. It wasn't uncommon for the group to kind of split up once they got there. They would have other friends to talk to, and it was common for them to leave their little group at different times of the night, and even go home at different times of the night. Whenever they felt like they had enough, they would just call it a night and leave. Tegan had no idea that Sammy was no longer at the bar until Greg contacted her later. It also wasn't out of the ordinary for Greg to reach out to her and others in the group if he was trying to get a hold of Samantha. After talking to Greg, she explained she pulled up Find My Friend, and she sees the location where Samantha lost track, and it was the same one that Greg had mentioned. So she talks about how they went out to that location, but they didn't see any signs of her there, and no one was able to contact her for the rest of the night. While the Columbia PD and SLED searched for Samantha and the vehicle that drove away with her, Marcy and Seymour sped down to South Carolina. Samantha's parents were keeping in touch with investigators as they made their way there. They wanted to learn as many details as they could. A few hours into this 10-hour journey, investigator Odom called Seymour to ask what their ETA was. After that phone call, Odom called Seymour and Marcy again and asked them what time they thought they were going to be in South Carolina. She told them that when they did arrive, they needed to head straight to the police station as soon as they got into town. Seymour did not have a good feeling about this. He literally turned his face away from his wife, and he started to curse under his breath. His daughter was in trouble, and he just had this feeling that this would not end well. Parents do end up having gut feelings sometimes. They just know things. Meanwhile, across town, out in the country, about an hour away from Columbia, 25-year-old Andrew Lee, who was turkey hunting with his buddy Ryan out in an area called New Zion, which he had done many times, noticed something strange. Ryan's family had land in New Zion, so they hunted there quite a bit, since it's close to his house and there's easy access. They arrived around 1:30 in the afternoon and went to a dirt road called Black Bottom Road. Then they went down to a farm road. This is sort of like an access road that's not on the main road. Andrew was using binoculars to scan the area for turkeys. He was walking down there for about 5 to 10 minutes, but it was when he turned back around to head toward Black Bottom Road again, and he was looking in those woods that something caught his eye. To the left, he saw something, and he couldn't really make out what it was. He kept looking, and the more he did, the more he began to realize it looked like a body. That's when he called his friend down there. They were both standing there looking in total disbelief. They didn't want to believe what they were looking at. Obviously, neither one of these men expected to see anything like that. They were in the middle of nowhere. It's not somewhere you just end up. It's somewhere you would deliberately go. It's just farmland and woods as far as the eye can see. For example, this near store is where the pin is on the map. This is far from town. So they weren't exactly sure if it was a body, but they knew it looked like it, and they didn't want to go any closer. There were a lot of dense trees, and one of them was uprooted and it was blocking their view, but they were just a few feet away, and they were certain they were looking at a deceased human being just lying there, lifeless in the woods. At this point, they knew they needed to call for help, but they didn't know how to relay their location to authorities. They didn't want to lose this spot, so instead, they called a man that they knew, named Mr. Bubba Morris. He actually works for the Department of Natural Resources, and he's very familiar with this area. They called Ryan's dad to get Bubba's number, and once they called Bubba, he was out there within 10 minutes. Bubba went down, looked at what they were looking at, and called law enforcement. They waited for them to arrive. They never went closer to the body. This is an area where you don't see random traffic. When you do see someone, it's someone you know. Locals who live in this area, hunt, and hang out in this area. It's not uncommon for people to grab some beers and guns and head out into these woods to hunt, have a few cigarettes, talk, or for kids to ride their four-wheelers in this area. They have little get-togethers. So, when Mr. Morris got there, he parked, walked on to where the guys were standing, and from about 25 feet away, he could clearly see clothing on what looked like a human body. None of these men wanted to get any closer. They were only trying to confirm what they were seeing, and once it was confirmed in their minds at least, they called in the sheriff. This area that they're in is known as sort of a lover's lane, if you will, and Mr. Morris every so often has to go down there and break up kids being kids, hanging out, drinking, doing what teenagers do. But these aren't random kids. Like I said, never in 26 years of him working in DNR has he stopped someone that wasn't from this area. So he did immediately call law enforcement. Sheriff Thomas Huckabee was the officer notified to go to the scene. He parked his vehicle up on that main dirt road and walked down to where the guys were standing, eventually making his way towards what was believed to be a body. Once he was close enough, he was able to confirm that it was indeed a deceased female. He called his supervisor to let him know. However, when Officer Huckabee went back to the station, he was looking through missing persons reports, and he realized something. There was a female that appeared to look like the body that he saw. So he brought this to the sheriff's attention. It was the clothing that she was wearing, and the ones that were described in the bolo that matched what Huckabee saw. The woman also looked very out of place for that area. It looked as though she had been dumped there, not that her death had occurred there. That is when he alerted the CPD that their missing person may be the woman he found in the woods. It was going to get a lot more interesting from here. Lieutenant Todd Schenk from SLED D was one of the first crime scene investigators on the scene. As he walked down the Mander Road, he did not see a body. It wasn't until he got to the footpath that the body was visible. I'm going to show you this and blur the body so you can understand exactly where she was found. She was laying sort of on her side, with her left arm underneath her body and her right arm laid across her chest near her left hip. They could distinctly see a broken pair of platform sandals. One of them was still attached by the ankle strap, but it was no longer across her toes. Her shirt had been pulled up towards her head, and there was a drawstring on her shirt that was past her head. It was apparent that this woman had been stabbed. There was a very large amount of blood on the victim, and wounds could be seen all over her body. At first glance, without further inspection, there were visible wounds to her head, her shoulder, her right hand, her right leg, her neck, her back, and her right foot. They began to look around, because they were trying to ascertain whether the struggle and the killing happened at this location or elsewhere. They were looking for a knife or blood around the area, but based on where she was, how she was laying, and the lack of blood evidence at the scene, other than on her body, they determined that the altercation did not happen at this location, and that she was left at this spot after her death. They don't touch or manipulate the body until the coroner arrives and gives them permission to do so. So until he gets there, the investigators are taking photos and documenting what they see. When the coroner arrived, they continued their investigation by rolling the body over and looking at her back. It was apparent that there were drag marks on her back and arms. She had been dragged through the brush and dirt. They also looked at her fingernails and took fingernail scrapings to check for DNA that might exist underneath. That's when they noticed her fingernails were an area of interest. They looked ripped, broken, cut, or torn. They did not look normal. They did not look right. It almost looked like someone had deliberately cut her fingernails off with some kind of instrument so that maybe something wouldn't be found underneath. They also took a buccal swab from her cheek to get a sample of her DNA, which they now call a known DNA sample. Since they know it's hers, they can compare it to any other DNA they find. They also took her fingerprints and footprints for the same reason, to rule them out if they find a crime scene. They also brought out their ALS, alternative light source, which is a light with a different wavelength than white light. Think about black lights. It enables them to see blood, bodily fluids, fibers, and bruises that cannot be seen with the naked eye. When the victim was on the stretcher, they used the ALS to see a number of bruises on her sides and various areas throughout her entire body. There was also an earring in her right ear, but the one on the left was missing. So they ran a metal detector over the area to attempt to locate it. I thought this was something they did above and beyond. I said that is so respectful to the victim, to go looking for an amazing earring. But I come to find out this is actually common practice. I had just not heard about it in any of the other cases that I've covered. Although DNA testing would be required to confirm their findings, they did conclude that the body they found was that of Samantha Josephson. It was because she was dressed in the same clothes that Samantha had worn to the Bird Dog Lounge the night before. A couple of hours earlier, Greg was the first to arrive at the police station. He was taken into a room with investigators who were grilling him, asking him a bunch of questions. It had been 24 hours since Samantha had gone missing. When he was done with that interview, they escorted him to the main lobby and he was surprised because all of Samantha's roommates were waiting there. He had no idea, and once they were all together, they escorted all of them into a conference room. When they got in there, they were surprised again. That's where they saw Mr. and Mrs. Josephson, just sitting there, looking sad and distraught. Seymour and Marcy had arrived in Columbia and headed straight to the police station as they were told to do. After getting there, officers led them into that same large meeting room. They looked around, and that's when they noticed there was a man. They looked at his jacket and saw the word coroner embroidered on the back. It was obvious to them that they were not going to get good news. They were going to get news that their daughter was no longer alive. The investigators confirmed that, even though they didn't have the DNA results yet, they found a body that matched Samantha's description. Greg broke down. He fell to his knees and actually blacked out. He was in such shock and disbelief, and Seymour and Marcy were just beside themselves. Seymour had to make the hardest phone call he ever had to make, to his daughter Sydney in New Jersey. He said hearing Sydney scream and not being able to be there for her hurt him, and it still does. When Seymour called her, she was waiting for their call at a neighbor's house. As the neighbor answered the phone, Sydney saw her drop to the ground in tears, and she rushed to that phone because she wanted to hear it for herself. She already knew, she just wanted to hear it directly from him. She also heard her mother screaming in the background as he was telling her what had happened. Sydney began to hyperventilate. She felt like she couldn't breathe, and for her parents not being with her at that time was just so difficult. Marcy wasn't sure if it was a good idea for Sydney to remain at home, but at that moment, she just knew she wished she could be there to hold her. An investigator with SLED, Lee Blackman, said that they needed a lead to move this investigation forward. He stepped out of the police station, and this man said a prayer because he feared that he would not be able to solve this case. It was then that he was told to return to 5 Points because they had just pulled somebody over who was driving a dark-colored Chevy Impala. Every police officer in this city had been searching for a dark-colored Chevy Impala for 24 hours since they got that bolo. They were looking. Canine handler Jeffrey Kraft patrolled that area near Samantha's last sighting that evening. Before his shift, he had looked repeatedly at the footage of Samantha entering that vehicle. He watched it time and time again, and he was diligently searching the streets looking for that car. Officer Kraft began his patrol in Rosewood in that community. He started his shift on Friday evening at 6 p.m., and his shift stretched into Saturday early morning. After driving around in that Rosewood neighborhood and up and down the streets for hours, he found nothing. Officer Kraft then decided to drive back to 5 Points, and within seconds of pulling toward the border of the town, the officer spotted a black Chevy Impala. It matched the description of the car that Samantha had gotten into. It was going down that main street Hardin, towards Blossom Street, right here, where this red star is on the map. Officer Kraft got behind the Impala at this point, and he followed it towards 5 Points. The car got into the left lane to take a left turn on Blossom Street. This is just 2 blocks away from the Bird Dog, roughly 800 feet. Officer Kraft flashed his blue lights because the vehicle matched the description in the bolo, but the driver kept going. He did not pull over. He kept driving down Blossom and then tried to make a left turn down a street called Saluda Avenue. However, if you look here, this is a very unique road. It's divided by a grassy median, and there are 2 roads with the same name, one going in each direction. It's very obvious to drivers typically which one you're supposed to travel down. I looked at the street view, and it's really obvious to me. There's no light at the first street. See? There it is, facing the opposite way. You would not turn left here. Besides, there's a one-way sign right here. This is the correct road that you would go down, except the driver didn't do that. The driver was going down the wrong way, on the first road, oncoming traffic. Right here there are even white lines, the turn arrows upside down, and the cars are facing the opposite way. How would he not know? But then he finally comes to a complete stop on Saluda Avenue. Granted, it was already pretty dark. We do have that dash cam video from the patrol car, and you see Officer Kraft following behind the car right here. Kraft immediately notifies dispatch of his find and signals for the Impala to pull over. The whole exchange was recorded on Officer Kraft's body cam footage. However, what I find interesting is that the dash cam comes on first. When you turn on the blue lights, the moment you hit the blue lights, it actually starts to record the previous minutes to catch the moment you turn on the lights, which is pretty cool. So it kind of jumps back in time and is already recording. We get to see this vehicle make the wrong turn again. I don't know how he thought that he was going in the right direction when he was pulled over, but you already see him kind of rummaging around and moving in the car. So Kraft goes up to the driver's side of this vehicle. His primary goal at that point is to make sure everything's safe. He's also observing everything, and he too sees the driver moving around in the car. He didn't know Samantha's body had already been discovered, so he was hoping to find her alive inside the Chevy Impala. As soon as the officer got out of the vehicle, goal to approach the car, he smelled marijuana. He gets up to the driver, and he's cooperative at first. He's kind of slumped back with his hoodie over his head, but he's answering all of Kraft's questions. Officer Kraft asked the driver for his license, but the driver didn't have it. The driver actually scoffs if you listen carefully when Kraft says, "Why don't you have your license?" The driver says something about him leaving it at a club, but he gets very defensive right away. "You got our license? Get your license on you? I'm also crowded Columbia police." "No, no license on you." When the officer inquired about who was smoking, the driver replied that he was, but it was before he left his house. "Who's smoking the marijuana?" Feeling uneasy, Officer Kraft asked the driver to step out of the vehicle. The driver was still cooperative. That is, until Officer Kraft noticed his hands were in his pocket. "All right, here's the deal, man. I pulled your car over to the match as a suspect. Get your hand in your pocket." "What? Are you crazy?" Having no idea whether the driver of this Impala was about to take out a weapon, Officer Kraft ordered him to remove his hands from inside his pockets. Once the driver did that, Officer Kraft started to explain why he pulled him over, but the driver began to run, and Kraft ran after him, yelling for him to stop. Where do people think they're gonna go to when they run? I'm really curious, like, why run? They have all your information, right? Because you left your vehicle behind, so it makes you look extremely suspicious to run. As the driver fled, Officer Kraft called for backup and described his attire, his hoodie, his sweatpants. Watch carefully as Kraft is trying to explain why he pulls him over. The driver puts his hands in his pockets, which is one of the scariest things an officer can encounter, by the way. This person may have a weapon on them, so Kraft tells him to take his hand out of his pocket. The driver starts to turn, and Kraft tells him to get over here. Then he takes off running, with Kraft trying to keep up unsuccessfully. But within moments, the backup arrives on the scene and runs after the suspect. Officer Kraft returns to the Chevy Impala. Other officers were called, as well as that canine. Kraft goes back to the car because there was another occupant inside, on the passenger side of the car. That's why he was asking, "Who's smoking?" because there were two people in there. The woman who is now outside the car was being questioned by one of the other officers on the scene. She was standing there near the front of the car, providing officers with information. Now Kraft wanted to make contact with this person because he didn't know who this driver was or why he would run. But because Officer Kraft smelled that marijuana when he pulled them over, he had probable cause to search the vehicle. He did search the interior of the vehicle and found a rose gold cell phone between the driver's seat and the center console. He was also able to determine that there were remnants of marijuana on the driver's side floorboard. He located a set of keys with a pink key ring on it inside the car as well. He took them and placed them on top of the Impala, along with that rose gold iPhone. Kraft scanned the back seat and opened the trunk, but he didn't do a complete search because this was not the time to do that. He could tell something happened in this car. He needed professionals to be called in because there was a significant amount of blood, footprints on the windows, and cleaning supplies, bleach in the car. It was a crime scene, and he needed a crime scene tech who was specialized in this area of expertise to analyze and preserve the evidence. A second officer arrived at the scene. When Officer Kraft asked him what kind of phone Samantha had, he wanted to know because his initial thought was that the rose gold iPhone belonged to her. On the keychain, they noticed the USB drive and wondered if this might be something a college student would carry. He knew the missing girl was a University of South Carolina student. "I'm trying to give you information from all directions, everything that's going on." So while this is going on, Officer Justin Asia had hurried that way when he heard the call, and he was the one who intercepted the driver on foot. He was able to catch up to him and arrest the driver around 2:36 a.m. Running from the police is an arrestable offense, so he frisked the driver for weapons, and none were found. The officers were evaluating the situation and trying to gain info about why this man ran. The driver did state he was sick, that he had the flu and was having trouble breathing, so they did have to call the EMTs to come check him out. That's protocol. Safety first. It's a big priority. So the officers let the driver sit down so that he could catch his breath and breathe better while they were waiting for the EMTs to get there. This is the point where they also read him his Miranda rights, but the driver refused to answer any questions, even a yes or no about whether he understood the Miranda rights. He would not answer, but that's something he did need to answer. After that, not speaking is his Fifth Amendment right, but he didn't even respond to the EMT's questions when they were trying to check him out and his vitals were being taken. At one point, the driver is just lying on the ground, looking like he's having issues breathing. The officers just think, yeah, he just has some issues because he was just running. So the officers start to rub his sternum, per protocol, sit him up so he can breathe better. But the driver would still not speak to EMS workers, and it didn't really seem like there was anything wrong with him. They took him to the ambulance to get him fully checked out, but they were thinking this must be some kind of act that he wasn't really hurt, especially because he's not talking. Then he finally says he wants to speak to an investigator. So Investigator Lee Blackman was summoned to the 5 Points area. Blackman explained to this man, who was now handcuffed in the back of a police vehicle, that he was there to speak to him. The man asked the officer why he was being detained, and he told him he ran away from the police during a traffic stop. The man nodded and said he knew that. Investigator Blackman also told him that marijuana was found inside the car, which was enough to keep him in custody. Things that were confiscated were his phone and bandanas taken from his head. At this time, the driver of the Impala refused to give law enforcement his name, so officers started taking pictures of him, trying to do facial recognition, scanning his fingerprints to determine who he was. Ultimately, they found out that Nathaniel Rowland was his name, and he was 24 years old. So, while waiting in 5 Points for Nathaniel to be brought to the station, Investigator Blackman asked him where he was the night before. Nathaniel told the investigator he had been at a party at an apartment near the university and slept in the Stadium Suites Hotel. He explains to the investigator that he found his car in the hotel parking lot when he woke up that morning. When Nathaniel opened the door, he said that his car was blood-stained, so someone must have borrowed it. Investigator Blackman walked over to the vehicle to inspect it, and he saw just how much blood had to have been in that car. His first thought was, this is where Samantha died. During Nathaniel's interrogation, Investigator Blackman asked him if he had traveled to the 5 Points area the night before, and he told the investigator he was at a house party. He would not provide specific information about who he was with or where. Nathaniel also denied ever visiting New Zion, where Samantha's body was found. New Zion, as I explained, was a small town. It was not a place someone would consider dumping a body unless they were familiar with it. At this point, Blackman explained to Nathaniel that a young woman was abducted from 5 Points around 2 a.m. on Friday. Nathaniel refused to answer any further questions. They did collect a swab of suspected blood off of a shoe, as well as scrapings from under his fingernails. But before the investigator left the room, he told Nathaniel to reflect on the past 2 days and to tell the truth. Nathaniel asked the investigator what he was talking about before shaking his head and saying that he was just going to go to sleep. The investigator was determined not to get tunnel vision and to think, we have our man. Instead, law enforcement had to investigate and find out where Nathaniel was and do their due diligence to ensure that Samantha was given the justice she deserved. That's when they located the Uber driver who had been requested to pick Samantha up at 5 Points the night she went missing. His name is Marcus Williams. Marcus told investigators he was 49 years old, married from Columbia, South Carolina, went to school there, and worked for the city for 10 years until he was injured. That's when he began driving for Uber. All he said he had to do to get started was send his driver's license, registration, and a copy of his insurance. He told them he had a charcoal gray Dodge Charger at the time. Then they did a background check and either approved or denied you, and he was approved. He began working and drove his 2011 Dodge Charger. He had been driving for 3 or 4 months at the time that Samantha requested a ride. He accepted that ride and drove out to 5 Points to pick up Samantha. He had a 5-star rating. His car was always clean, he always got good tips, and he was a good driver. And in case you're not familiar with Uber, don't be ashamed if you've never heard of it or you haven't taken one. Uber is a rideshare app. Anyone can sign up for free and begin requesting a ride. Then, all you do is open the app, put in the address of the destination you want to go to, and once the app connects with an authorized and approved driver that works for them, they get an alert, and you get an alert with the driver's information. You usually get their name, the color of the vehicle, the model of their car, their rating, and you can even cancel if you want, for whatever reason. Marcus heard that the 5 Points area was a very busy location for college kids, so he frequently worked there. He was actually just ending a ride from another person in the 5 Points area when he got another alert that Samantha needed a ride. Marcus said he was diligent. He always called the person right when he got the alert to let them know he was on the way. So, he called Samantha when he was on Hardin and Divine right here, and she did not answer. So, Marcus circled around. He usually gave people 5 to 10 minutes as a grace period because, they're at bars, they're maybe cashing out, maybe they're talking, maybe they're walking slower, they've maybe had a few drinks. After the app realizes that you were at the destination and you've not picked up the rider, it will send an alert to cancel the ride. So as he circled again and again a couple of times, he had to cancel. He said he never picked her up. Never, to his knowledge, had he ever seen her or had she ever been in his car. Marcus did give them a DNA sample, and they let him go. They told him they would call him back in if they needed him. So, using the information that Samantha's parents gave them, investigators searched her bank records. That was the next thing they wanted to do, and they realized that there were several attempts where someone was trying to use her ATM card at a couple of banks. One was 45 miles away from Columbia, and twice at another bank in Sumner County. This was very early in the morning on Friday, 5:45 a.m. in Sumter and 6:48 a.m. in Columbia. With a search warrant, the investigators obtained CCTV footage from the ATMs, and they showed a man wearing dark clothing and gloves. He was clearly trying to conceal his identity. His hoodie was so tight on his face, look at this, and his face was hidden by a mask. This is what they saw. This man was unable to withdraw any money from the ATMs because he did not have the correct PIN. They zoomed in, and they can tell he's wearing a bandana with a money design on it. He's wearing a black jacket, gloves, a beige shirt underneath, and a black hoodie underneath this black jacket with a white drawstring and black Nike slides. Crime scene investigators began searching the Chevy Impala and processing all of the evidence. Investigators were able to search the vehicle much more closely after they obtained that warrant. And first, they did notice the child locks were engaged, indicating that Samantha couldn't have escaped once she stepped into that car. Samantha would not have been able to open the doors or roll down the windows. It had permeated the seats. Lieutenant Kristen Grant said that she had never in her life seen so much blood in the 25 years of being an officer, never in Nathaniel's car. Investigators found a footprint on a window, and it appeared as though whoever left it there was trying to kick it open, so they lifted those prints for analysis. Lab workers with SLED arrived early that morning to test the evidence they found in the Chevy Impala and obtain a DNA profile. The results confirmed what the investigators had suspected. The blood inside the Impala belonged to Samantha Josephson, and that footprint, that was hers as well. Clearly, she was fighting for her life. Meanwhile, investigators tried to access Samantha and Nathaniel's cell phones. They wanted to find out where they were that night, and it turned out the Columbia police chief gave Samantha's family an update, telling them that, and even though Seymour and Marcy still felt like he urged the students at this Marcy told the crowd there was no time to sit and say goodbye or to hold Samantha's hand. Samantha's sorority sisters described her as the next Amal Clooney. Greg talked about how and her energy during her short stay on this planet. And that report revealed an unknown sharp weapon. It seemed to have parallel. He scoured the internet, searching through thousands of photos on Google to try to find a knife with two blades. He knew that if they could find, they could locate the killer. There were defensive wounds to her hands. The one in the palm of her right hand went all the way through to the other side, and this is most likely because she instinctively put her hand up to shield her face. She did have a defect on the hyoid bone on the right side, but the neck wounds impacted the carotid artery. This coincided with the amount of blood that was left behind in the black Impala. There was only an eighth of a cup of blood left in her body at the time. This poor woman bled out. With a stranger who locked her in a car. It's absolutely gut-wrenching to think about. He said that he wanted to see him fry, but his family advised him that this wasn't the time. They had to plan for her funeral. That's not what Seymour wanted. He didn't want to bury his child. Samantha They actually lost contact for a while. He said, "Hey girl." And they hung out for a bit. They were dating at this point. And he would always do that for. He referred to it as. This was one of his favorite places. "Why haven't you washed your ass in a couple of days?" To which he didn't respond. This was being playful, but she was also pretty serious because it was obvious. They also found clothing, and in one of the garbage bags,